Shell and with the Nashville Predators. I want to touch on some things we heard from Ryan McDonough in our sit down with him yesterday. At home again, since there's yet another winter weather advisory here in Nashville. I believe the snow is supposed to start in the next hour or so, just here in the next few minutes, at least over by me. So be careful, stay warm. Willy D-Mase, happy Thursday. How we doing?
Hey, happy Thursday. Everything's going well, except this snow. It needs to melt. Can we get Willie, can you send some of that weather east so we can melt all this snow?
It's on its way. It's on its way, Derek. I was right in an area that I know you love, LA Live, last night.
Uh-huh.
Very happy Laker fans.
Absolutely.
Piling out of crypto.com arena. I still get used to saying that here. It was Staples Center for so long.
It was
But the
the
Lakers
LA
got their
Arena
W
name.
last night. And it was funny. The Lakers were finishing up their game. They had an early start. I don't really know why. They started at 5 or 5:30 local time here, maybe for TV purposes or something. They dismantled the Mavericks. So their crowd spills out. I go back to my room after I grab something to eat, and Bronny James is playing for USC at Arizona.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just picturing the announcers, Jay Billis, and I forgot who was doing the game with him, but I'm thinking they have to be knowing that LeBron is running into the clubhouse right now or the locker room and flipping on the game to watch Bronny. You just know that any dad would be doing that right now because they kept referring to LeBron about every 10 minutes. But I had not seen Bronny James play that much. USC is really struggling. They've had some injuries, and supposedly LeBron has put out there that he thinks Bronny's ready for the NBA right now. I certainly didn't see that.
It's a proud dad right there.
Exactly.
Maybe he's been clouded vision a little bit as a dad. I get it. I get it.
I understand it. I know that has been LeBron James' dream for a good bit of his career, is sticking it out long enough in the NBA so he gets the opportunity to play with his son. So he might just be expediting the process. Like, look, I'm sore. I'm much more sore than I used to be. I stay sore for a lot longer. So maybe let's just go ahead and get him in the NBA, so I can get the opportunity to play with him. But what a cool experience, Willie! And some more action in LA tonight. The Predators are taking on the Kings tonight. Puck drop is at 9 o'clock local time in Nashville, so a little bit of a late one, but we'll have all of your pregame coverage tonight on 102.5 and 106.3 The Game. We'll touch on that with Elliot Friedman. We'll have a full Preds and Kings preview in the 1 o'clock hour. But I did want to start on this. We've been talking about this over the last few days of how attractive is this Titans coaching vacancy. And we talked about a few factors that could be considered there. Roster, quarterback, ownership. I'd mentioned market in there, and that might be more applicable to maybe the Dallas Cowboys. That if that was a vacancy, which as we have learned, it is not, and we will get into that the Dallas Cowboys are holding on to Mike McCarthy. But the three biggest criteria that we've been looking at is roster, quarterback, and ownership, and kind of ranking the Titans based off of the rest of the vacancies in the NFL. Of course, the Chargers, the Panthers, the Falcons, the Seahawks, so on and so forth. Mike Sando of The Athletic did his own ranking. Now, this is Mike Sando's ranking himself. It wasn't polling GMs or coaches. This was Mike Sando just taking the factors at hand and just giving it his own ranking. Mike Sando writes the 8 current openings, which is not 8, it's 7 because the Patriots filled that vacancy. But he said that he ranked it, but that's in this list. So I've ranked these vacancies below using 3 basic criteria: likelihood of winning in the first 2 seasons, whether winning the division is realistic, and to what degree ownership flaws might be fatal. So, of course, I'm looking at this, looking for the Titans. First job is the Chargers. I don't think any of us really have many gripes with that. I don't disagree with that, at least. 2, Atlanta Falcons, which I was a little bit surprised to see. 3, Seattle Seahawks. I'm like, okay, still scrolling. 4, Patriots. Of course, we know that the Patriots job is no longer a vacancy, as Gerard Mayo is filling that vacancy. 5, the Raiders. 6, Washington. And then finally, in 7 of 8, the Carolina Panthers is the last ranked job in this list. 7th of 8 is the Tennessee Titans. Mike Sando writes, when the Titans fired GM John Robinson late in the 2022 season, it looked like a potential power play by then coach Mike Vrabel. In retrospect, that wasn't the case. Vrabel suffered a similar fate a year later. Owner Amy Adams Strunk was the common denominator. The next coach needs to investigate what went wrong in Tennessee, where Vrabel was cruising along as a top coach, then suddenly couldn't win. Now, there's another part here that I want to get to, but first I want to touch on that. Maybe the ownership angle. Is now Amy Adams Strunk, based off of the firing of John Robinson, which I think we can all agree came very abruptly. John Robinson never had a losing season. The Titans were 7-5 at that point, had a commanding lead of the division. Then he gets fired in the middle of the season. Fast forward just over a year later, Mike Vrabel gets fired, and that has been viewed widely across the league, whether you agree with it or not, has been viewed as a rash decision, as a crazy decision, because so many people view Mike Vrabel as such a good coach. That maybe sound like there is a perception around the league of Amy Adams Strunk being a meddling owner or an owner that makes pretty rash decisions.
Yeah, I can see where that would be one's assumption, considering what happened to John Robinson at a point. It's not that they fired him or she fired him. It was the circumstances around it, where the team was at that particular moment. They were leading the AFC South. It seemed like they were on their way to winning the AFC South once again. And all of a sudden, it went from, signing, John Robinson or extending John Robinson's contract 6 months earlier to now, overnight firing him. And I understand it wasn't, she just woke up and said, I'm going to fire him. I'm sure there were things that she saw leading up to that. But on the outside looking in, it seemed like everything was going well. And then all of a sudden they play the Philadelphia Eagles. They get ramsacked. A.J. Brown has a great game. And then all of a sudden, John becomes the scapegoat and he gets fired. So I can see why one would assume she's a meddling or an owner that's indecisive. But beyond that, that was the first time that she actually, went in and did something on her own. Obviously firing, Wizenhunt and everything else, that probably was a collaborative effort amongst all of those that are in power. But it seemed like this John Robinson deal was hers and hers alone, just like it seems like the Mike Vrabel deal was hers and hers alone. I don't think she's a meddling owner. I think she's an owner, sort of like her dad, in the sense of, listen, when I don't see it going right and I don't think it's going to get better, I need to cut bait right now. I don't need to wait. And it seems like that's what she did with John Robinson, and it seems like that's what she did with Mike Vrabel. But the John Robinson situation, I think, like I said, it came at a time that it seemed like everything was going well. And then all of a sudden she ends up firing him. But I don't think she's this meddling owner. Now, we've seen meddling owners. We've seen owners that get into the business of the team a lot. I don't think she makes her mind up. She's going with it.
I think that's a big part of it. Is I think the perception of her is a little bit of a wild card, especially when you consider the reputation and the credibility that both Robinson and Vrabel had nationally.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important perspective for the Titans to absorb when they read these things, because I don't think Sando's opinion is an outlier, right? I think that's kind of the general sense of what the national media sees from the outside. So that's important to know. The other thing, though, that I think is becoming a theme, which surprises me a little bit, is that there seems to be very little faith that Will Levis potentially could be a good quarterback. I'm not seeing that. I watched the game in Miami. I watched the game in Pittsburgh. I watched the game against Atlanta. Mm. He's put together some good games. He had some struggles, but I saw those as games where the entire team really struggled. So I'm very curious about where guys like Michael Lombardi, now Mike Sando, and some others are kind of like, Will Levis, I don't know. There seems to be that out there. I'm not getting that.
Quickly to D-Mace's point, there's always a difference between our perception,
Uh-huh.
being close to the team, seeing it up close and personal, going to the press conferences, listening to the press conferences, watching the game, so on and so forth. Because we know it isn't really what everyone else in the national media does do with the Tennessee Titans. So the Tennessee or the Titan fan perspective often is different from maybe the national perspective. Where D-Mase, you could look at it and say, look, John Robinson made a bad AJ Brown trade, and then Mike Vrabel wasn't winning games, and there was a bad relationship with he and Rand Carthon that it may have been time to move on, and Amy Adams Strunk didn't want to waste any time. And I don't think that you're wrong in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the national perception, or just the perception in general of Amy Adams Strunk, the outside perception of Amy Adams Strunk, is the damaging thing here. Because you or I might not view it of like Amy Adams Strunk making Jerry Jones type of decisions,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe Bobby Slowick feels that way. Maybe any of these other coaches that are interviewing for the Titans vacancy feels that way. And if they feel that way, that's really the most important thing. And that's the most damaging thing to the perception of this job and to the perception of the Titans. Now, Amy Adams Strunk might be an absolute nightmare to work with. I don't know, nor do I really believe that she's an absolute nightmare to work with. But the two major decisions that she's made in the last year and a half of firing John Robinson and firing Mike Vrabel, I don't think were perceived as very well thought through decisions, and that a coach might look at it and say, I don't know if I want to get into that situation. I don't know if I want to be putting myself in an uncomfortable position where, I make it to the playoffs, AFC championship game, top seed in the AFC, and then I turn around and get fired a couple years later.
What
I
I think
agree
it,
in the firing, but I
uh-huh.
understand if that's the perception. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's easier to explain the John Robinson fire. It's easier to do that because
You
you can
think?
go down. Yeah, because I think you can go down the list, and we went down a list of things John hit with and things John's missed with, and we felt that that's what led to the firing. If you look at his misses, they were colossal misses because those misses are still rearing his head up today, meaning the season this past season, 23 season. So it's reared its ugly head. So it's easier to explain, okay, this is why she fired John Robinson. Maybe it wasn't the right time or the most opportune time to do it. But she had, like young kids say, she had receipts for the reasons why she could fire John Robinson. I think Mike Vrabel's a different story. I think it's harder for her, just based on the surface things. It's harder to try to explain that to the outside viewers, not those that are not here in Nashville each and every day. Those so more of the national view. It's harder to explain why would you fire Mike Vrabel as opposed to why would you fire John Robinson, because people are going to look at Vrabel and they're going to say, well, he was coach of the year. Look what he was able to do with this team. They're going to go down a list of things that he has done that would have warranted him another year of trying to get this roster straight. Easier to explain away John Robinson. I think it's a little bit harder to explain why would you fire a head coach that around the coaching circles, nationally, he's revered. He's like the next coming. So why would you fire him? I think it's a little bit harder to explain. Not to say she didn't get this right, but explaining it might take a little bit more than it would have with John Robinson.
I think the other thing that jumps out at me, and I agree with what you're saying, D-Mase, I think also we have to realize that even though when you're in Nashville and you see a lot of close games and you say, well, they're right there. If they just won some close games, they could have maybe scratched out the division. I think you have to look at the perception of what others see the roster as. That's part of his criteria, right? That's a big part of why they have the Titans' job rated low. He doesn't think the roster is very good. And I agree, especially now when you move on, you're moving on into a new era where presumably you're not going to have Tannehill or Derrick Henry, who have been staples for a long time. And you couple that with, as he kind of puts Rand Carthon in the category of sort of an unknown GM. And then circling back, you're still a few years away from the new stadium. You have a family-owned, old-school type of ownership system, and they tend to not have the deep pockets that some owners have now. So if I'm a coach coming in and I'm looking at all that, I am asking myself, can I make it to the new stadium? Are we going to have the resources to be able to build a roster to where I can win and have a good team going into the new stadium? Or am I just the guy that's going to bridge the gap in these last couple of years? I think that's the challenge, I think, for the entire franchise these next few years. Can they get to the new stadium? And can they rebuild the roster with the proper resources? They have the cap space to do it, but now it's time to use those resources really smartly. And you've got to scout well and you got to draft well.
Yeah, that's kind of the secondary part of Mike Sando's description. First and foremost, it's the owner, maybe how Amy Adams Strunk is perceived. The second part is the roster. It says the Titans roster needs a reset. The franchise needs a quarterback. Let's stop there. The franchise needs a quarterback. Willie, that's what you just brought up. And I have heard more in the last probably week or two about really big questions around Will Levis. Now, I think another thing that we can't forget is Will Levis did fall to the second round. Now, there were 32 teams, 31 teams in the NFL that passed on Will Levis. So I think that's important to remember that at least initially, going through the draft process, maybe there were some questions about Will Levis. And then there was things brought up about, the personality and, maybe he's too macho, whatever it might be, whatever reason that he fell. He did in fact fall. So of course, general managers across the league started with questions with Will Levis and might still have questions about Will Levis. I still have questions about Will Levis. I don't feel 100% certain that Will Levis is going to be your franchise quarterback for the next 10 to 15 years. I sure hope so. And I think that we've seen flashes of Will Levis looking like he can be the dude. But we've also seen some not so great things from Will Levis. You can attribute that to a horrendous offensive line. You can attribute that to not having a ton of pass catching weapons. You can attribute that to learning a third offense in 3 years with 3 different offensive coordinators in 3 years, going back to his first year at Kentucky. So you can attribute a lot of things to that. You can also attribute it to maybe Will Levis just isn't the dude. Maybe he's not a franchise quarterback. But there have been more questions about the belief in Will Levis, whether it was Michael Lombardi. I heard it from Charles Robinson, from some things that he was hearing from coaches and GMs across the league when Charles Robinson was on with Robbie and Rexroad this morning. And we'll get into somewhat of what Charles Robinson had to say coming up next. And then again, in this athletic piece, we've heard some of it from Tim Hasselbeck as well, who will join us in less than an hour. A lot of people that aren't necessarily have a lot of belief in what Will Levis can be.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this young man, give him let this season, because I don't understand it either. I don't understand, why people think like, okay, when you're talking about the Tennessee Titans, that the quarterback is the top concern. I understand that the quarterback is top priority around the league. I get that. But the top concern for the Titans is their quarterback? I don't think so. I think the top concern around the Titans is protecting their quarterback, getting more playmakers for their quarterback. It's not necessarily their quarterback. The kid came in, wasn't supposed to play this year. They didn't have him in the plans in regards to play this year. Had Ryan Tannehill stayed healthy and not just fallen off a cliff, Mike Vrabel would have rolled with Ryan Tannehill the whole season, which would have allowed Will Levis to sit back and learn how to play and how to be a quarterback in this league. But that wasn't the case because of the offensive line. Their starting quarterback gets hurt. Then his young quarterback comes in. And what does he do? He comes in and he throws 4 touchdowns. Everybody understood that was just an anomaly. That was one of those things that happened very few times with the rookie quarterback. And we knew eventually he would come down to earth. He came down to earth. Even while playing well in Pittsburgh, he came back down to earth but he was able to handle what Pittsburgh was throwing at him. As the season went on, because of the offensive line, I think his production started to slip. He started to play a little bit hero ball. He started to develop some bad habits that he needs to get out of. Let this young man have a off season to sort of address some of those things, get his body to where it needs to be. He don't need to be bulky. If that's what people are pointing at, one of the issues with him, he doesn't need to be bulky. He just needs to go out there and make sure that he can throw the ball 80 yards like he can now. But you got to give this young man another try. Surround him with individuals that can play. If he was a first rounder, here's the deal. If he was a first rounder and didn't put mayo in his coffee and didn't take the selfies, then we would be talking about Will Levis in a different light. But because of all these things and these preconceived notions of Will Levis, they already have a bias against him. I don't know if he's going to be great. I don't know if he's going to flop, but he did give me enough this season that I saw that I'm thinking, okay, this kid could be the dude. Let's just surround him. Remember, they thought Lamar Jackson wasn't going to be the guy over the last couple of seasons. They surrounded him with more playmakers, and look what he's doing. They didn't think Josh Allen was the guy. You give him a Stephon Diggs, look at what he's doing. They didn't think Trevor Lawrence was the guy. You change the head coach, look what he was able to do. So give this young man another year before they sort of write him off or say this is the big issue with the Tennessee Titans. It's not an issue. The quarterback is not the issue, I don't believe. I think the people around him and who you surround him with is the issue at this point.
Mm-hmm. Could not agree more. I would throw Jared Goff into that conversation.
Exactly, Jared Goff.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of directions it could go, but right now the more pressing issue is the rest of the roster. You've got a quarterback that you have to give a shot to.
Mm-hmm. Look at Jordan Love. I counted Jordan Love out.
Exactly.
I thought, the Packers are probably going to be in the quarterback market. Look what he did against Dallas. Absolutely not. So, D-Mase, I'm 100% with you. That I'm saying, Will Levis is the quarterback next season. I don't know if he is that guy. I do still have questions about Will Levis. I think it's fair to still have questions about Will Levis. But what I think doesn't matter. What we think might not matter. What matters is, it sounds like there's a resounding sentiment, at least outside of Nashville, that there are a lot of people that aren't maybe willing to give Will Levis the benefit of the doubt or another opportunity.
To the point, Caroline, where they're saying you need to be looking for another quarterback. I think that's so far from being fair to Levis and saying that he's done enough that you got a lot of things on the agenda here. You've got to find a coach. You got to find players. You don't have a cornerback at all. You have a gaping holes in the offensive line. Those are pressing needs. You've got a quarterback that has a chance, but they're putting in some of these little tidbits. You have to be looking for the next quarterback. What? Did they not watch the Miami game? Did they not watch the Falcons game? I mean, he could still turn into Mitch Trubisky. I get it. He could still be Jake Locker. I get that. But we don't know yet. He's got a chance to be pretty good.
I'm with you that I'm not out on Levis. I'm not 100% all in. I'm not, the queen of Levistown, but I think that you've got
Does everybody wear jeans in Levistown?
Oh, only Levi's. Levi's and bananas. They're the only things that are sold in Levistown.
And mayo.
I'm with you, but clearly that's not the sentiment that maybe some other people might be feeling. But I do want to continue this conversation coming up next, because you might be hearing this and saying, well, that's Mike Sando's opinion. That's one guy's opinion. Why does he matter? I get it. I hear you. But Charles Robinson was on with Robbie and Rexroad this morning, and sounds like there's some GMs and coaches around the league that share Mike Sando's sentiments. So we'll get into that coming up next. We'll get into your phones. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase, we're brought to you by Zen Sports. Start earning cash rewards on your bets today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and in Tennessee to bet.
Everyone, we got 2 more days until the NFL playoff second round divisional round starts, and I know you're gonna be, betting on whichever team you love, and you may not even love the team. You just may think they're gonna win, so you're gonna bet. So if you're going to do that, then do it with our partners, Zen Sports. And I'm excited to tell you about their new introductory promotion, okay? Available to all customers, all new customers in Tennessee. It's the No Danger First Wager. When you sign up for a Zen Sports account, you will receive up to $1,000 No Danger First Wager. When you place your first bet on Zen Sports, you will be reimbursed for the amount of your bet if it loses up to $1,000. Plus, let me tell you this, Zen Sports has launched a new VIP program for the premier bettors of Tennessee. If you think you might qualify, then listen up, okay? The VIP program is by invite only. You need an invitation, people. So if you feel that your Zen Sports play qualifies for a VIP consideration, please check out the program details and apply at zensports.com/VIP. No other sports book will offer you a premier sports betting experience with 24/7 top tier customer support and bigger and better action than this sport. So what are you waiting for, people? Get going and download their app today at zensports.com. Zen Sports, betting just got better. And remember, gambling problems, if you have them, call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 years or older to bet here in Tennessee.
Welcome.
Caroline, Willy, D-Mase, we are broadcasting from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Game Nashville studios, keeping your home feeling comfortable all year round. You're going to need those homes to feel comfortable. Another cold front coming through, some more snow coming through. I believe it should start, if it hasn't already started in your area, it's going to start here shortly. So be careful. Try and stay off the roads because I know that there's more snow and ice coming. So Mike Sando put out a piece in The Athletic ranking all of the vacancies in the NFL. Now, he does add the New England Patriots into this list, but as we know, the New England Patriots vacancy has been filled by Gerard Mayo. But they are in this list. So of the 8 vacancies that Mike Sando has ranked and the criteria that he has used to rank the open jobs is let me find it. Sorry, excuse me. Likelihood of winning in the first 2 seasons, whether winning the division is realistic, and to what degree ownership flaws might be fatal. Based off of that criteria, he ranks the Titans as the second to worst coaching vacancy in the NFL, better only than the Carolina Panthers. He talks about Amy Adams-Strunk, maybe making some pretty rash decisions to fire John Robinson and Mike Vrabel. He mentions how the Texans and with C.J. Stroud, they look like they could be the class of the division if Trevor Lawrence and the Jags continue on an upward trajectory, and also brings Rand Carthon into question that he is an unproven GM. So at least Mike Sando, it doesn't sound like he views the Titans job as a very good one compared to the rest of the vacancies in the NFL. But you might be saying, who cares what he thinks? Well, I think I would more so care about what coaches and general managers in the NFL think. Charles Robinson of Yahoo Sports, that has a lot of connections to coaches and GMs across the league, he was on with Robbie and Rexrode this morning. He mentioned how at Yahoo Sports, they are doing a poll of GMs and coaches to have them rank the Titans job. So where does the Titans job end up on that survey? This was Charles Robinson this morning.
I'll tell you what we did. We have a piece coming out later today where Joy Epstein and we reached out to 6, like a mix of coaches and executives, and we asked them to rank the 7 openings. So we said, look, we're going to do it on point system, 1 to 7, add it up and give us sort of your reasonings why. And the Titans finished 6th. And let's see, 1 5th place vote, 4 6th place votes. And someone voted them 7th, like worse than Carolina. And I was stunned when we talked to people just how damaging the Vrabel firing was to just sort of the questions of what's going on inside the organization. Like it was like, okay, well, if they're going to fire Mike, who's really well respected across the league, both in executive circles and head coaching circles, people are like, well, then why, like, what do they want? Like if he's not good enough as a coach or as a leader or whatever, and he and Amy may have been on the different pages there, it just raised a huge red flag for other people that, could potentially be on these lists. And the people we talked to, we tried to make it, okay, it's some of them are going to be people, a couple of them are going to be people that are prominently on lists now to be interviewed. Others are already in in head coaching or general manager spots. And then I even reached out to like a former general manager who had been through sort of the whole cycle before, coming up, getting hired, being in a position, and then getting fired, and then getting himself back into the league. So we really got a diversity of thought in terms of the experience. And it was remarkable to me, just some of the negativity that surrounds looking at that Tennessee job. And, you have some guys that are like, I don't know if the quarterback position's resolved. Like I personally, you have to be a sort of a Levis fan when you go in there. So that impacts, who's coming in, particularly given that at least the thought process of the candidates is that, Levis was a Rand and Amy influenced draft choice. So if you come in and you're like, I don't know, Levis, this is ultimately going to be the quarterback. Do you create friction for yourself when you come into the job? And then obviously the offensive line being in disrepair. There is some talent on the roster, and the biggest highlight I thought that might even tell you maybe how some candidates look at the Titans is just the immense amount of cap space over the next 2 off seasons, and the ability to pivot, pretty quickly. And I almost wonder if it's being looked at as like a 49ers job when Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch went in there, and by the end of 2 seasons, the vast amount of roster turnover that occurred under those two. I think the youth on the Titans is a little bit different. I think there are more guys worthy of keeping around, so it wouldn't be that 90% roster flip in 2 years, but it's looking to me, when you talk to people, like they feel like it's a much harder reboot than I initially thought.
And again, that was Charles Robinson, Yahoo Sports, on with Robbie and Rex Road. So he says why the job might not be attractive. First and foremost, what he's been hearing from GMs and coaches is they look at Mike Vrabel getting fired and think, well, if he gets fired, if someone who is widely regarded and widely respected around the league gets fired, then how safe would my job be? Second thing is, are you sold on Will Levis? Third thing, offensive line needs to be, basically entirely revamped. The roster needs a lot of help. And it's just going to be a tough reboot, to use Charles Robinson's words. What do we make of what Charles Robinson had to say on that?
Isn't that, aren't you describing at least 50% or 70% of the teams that ends up having a new coach at the end of the year? So let's just say you take, on average, there's at least 4 to 5 new head coaching jobs available just about every year. Every team, just about every team, let's say 3 out of those 5 teams fits the category of the Tennessee Titans, but people still take those jobs. Why? Because there's only 31, 32 of these jobs. And listen, if you don't get it, they're going to hire somebody else, and you may not ever get an opportunity to be in that seat again, especially if your irons are hot. Then yes, everybody wants the ideal job. There's only one ideal job, maybe 2 out there right now, and that is the Chargers and probably, let's say, Atlanta or Seattle. You can kind of flip flop, because Seattle believes they have their quarterback of the near future in Geno Smith.
And I can poke some holes in Atlanta.
Exactly, and you can poke holes in Atlanta, but Atlanta also has playmakers. They have an owner that is well respected, in this league. So they're willing to go out and do the things necessary to build a winning team. So what he's saying is true, but that can also be applied or applicable to, other teams out there that are going to ask for new, that are going to be in the market for a new head coach next year. To me, this is a great opportunity for a young GM and a first-year head coach to come in, and let's use the word that the Titans have been using the last year, collaborate and build a roster. Because Robinson, he was right in the sense of this. This could be a San Francisco 2.0 type situation, where San Francisco's roster, when Shanahan and them took over, it took some years to build up. They finally built it the way they wanted to, and look at them. We all look at San Francisco as one of the model franchises out there because of what they were able to do over the last course of the 3 or 4 seasons since Shanahan has been there. The Tennessee Titans can be that organization. You have a lot of cap room, which he said. You have some young players that can play on this roster. I think you do have your quarterback, but you still need to find out. And the only way you can find out is if you surround him with talent. So this roster, this team, might be the ideal situation for a new head coach, because we all get to come in with a clean slate, and we all get to build this thing together. Either it's going to fail and we're all gone, or it's going to work and people are going to be praising this organization and saying, oh my goodness, we knew they could do it. Look at what they did. Look at what Rand Carthon, his new coach, has done. Amy's great. They built this roster back up. That's what they're going to be. Exactly. So to me, this is a prime opportunity for what will be a second-year GM and a new coach to come in here and stabilize this franchise and build it back up from the ground.
I thought that Robinson's take there was pretty similar to Mike Sandoz in a lot of ways. It shows you, again, the reputation that Mike Vrabel has around the league. and or his ability to have the media eating out of the palm of his hand. Now, for sure. As you pointed out many times, we all have a lot of respect for Mike Vrabel as a coach, but at the same time, his reputation, I think nationally, it's fair to say, is better than his record and his results. You pointed that out more than once, Derek, over the years, right? He is an excellent coach, and he's never had the elite quarterback that makes it easier for a coach to win a championship. But that being said, you can't ignore how they collapsed the last couple of years. So nobody seems to say that when Sando and Robinson, they say, how could you fire Mike Vrabel? Did they not see what the record the last 24 games was? 6-18.
Yeah.
Look, we see that here. The other part that I thought was interesting about Robinson specifically is that they have the cap space. That's enticing for a coach. But the coach also has to be going in with a buy-in of Will Levis, right? If you don't believe in Will Levis, then you can't take this job, right? So either you have to pretend that you like Will Levis, talk yourself into believing Will Levis, or deeply believe that when you watch the film of Will Levis that you got something there. Otherwise, you're going down the wrong path to start with.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of those coaches are walking into an interview with the Titans saying, "Man, that Will Levis, he stinks. Let's trade up in this draft and get a quarterback." Yeah, that guy stinks. It's like, okay, like don't let the door hit you on the way out. But D-Mase, to your point about there's 32 of these jobs, and I'm with you that there is, if there is a coach out there whose only opportunity is to coach for a team or a franchise that we deem not to be that great of a job, you're not going to pass it up. But looking at the coaches, coordinators that the Titans are interviewing for the head coaching vacancy, they've all got opportunities and interviews elsewhere. If you look at Brian Callahan, he's interviewing all over the NFL. Bobby Slowick, Ben Johnson, Dan Quinn is even interviewing for several different openings. So this is not these coaches' only opportunity. That's the tough thing, the tough position that the Titans are in now. That it's an incredibly saturated head coaching vacancy market in the NFL right now. And let's say, I'm just going to take, for example, Bobby Slowick, who feels like kind of like the golden child on the coaching market right now. The guy that everyone is after, the guy that everyone has seen what has been going on with CJ Stroud and the Texans, and they want to be part of it. He kind of can maybe pick and choose. So if you are 6th of 7 on that list, you're not going to land maybe your coach of choice. But I do want to continue this coming up next. We've got loads of phones, so we are right to your thoughts coming up next. 615-737-1025 is the phone number if you want to get in on the conversation. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase, Tim Hasselbeck will join us in 15 minutes. 1025-1063 The Game.
This time of year, people, we reflect on the past and make plans for the year ahead. If you made a resolution to lose weight this year and you diet and exercise but still struggle to lose those pounds, it could be that your hormones are in balance. Call my friends at Cool Springs MD. Their experienced doctors specialize in identifying which of your hormones need to be balanced and provide a tailored solution designed just for you. No one else but you. Imbalanced hormones can also cause more problems than just weight loss, people. You may experience mood swings, fatigue, and a decreased sex drive. Hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, can help. Dr. Jeffrey Lodge and his team understands its frustrating cycle and want to help you be the best you can be this year. I'd want that as well. There's no better time to achieve a healthy lifestyle. People, what are you waiting for? Give Cool Springs MD a call today for an appointment. Here's the number, 615-486-3458. That's 615-486-3458, or visit their website at coolspringsmd.com. Don't let imbalanced hormones hinder your resolutions. Give Cool Springs MD a call today to take control of your health with HRT at Cool Springs MD.
and Willy D-Mase. We'll chat with Tim Hasselbeck in 10 minutes. We'll get his thoughts, how attractive he thinks the Titans coaching job is. Mike Sando put out an article in The Athletic ranking the 8 job openings in the NFL, including the New England Patriots, which of course we know has now been filled. He ranks the Titans 7th of 8th. Charles Robinson was on with Robbie and Rexroad this morning. Of the 7 openings, not including New England, he polled GMs and coaches around the league, and they ranked the Titans 6th of 7, better only than the Carolina Panthers. So unless we have some thoughts on that, we have some thoughts on our text line.
Let's go to the phones.
Let's get to the phones. Our phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. 615-737-1025 is our phone number if you have a thought on that. Jeff in Hendersonville, Texan says Vrabel and Robinson got 6 years. Carolina has had 7 coaches in those 6 years. Has it been 7 coaches in 6 years in Carolina?
Yeah, I guess because they
Has
had
it?
the intern coaches, and it has been a lot of coaches, and they've had just as many coaches as they had, in the
Well, they
last
had
7
4.
years. So
They've had 4 in the last 2 years.
yeah, so
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
that's true. But that's also why Carolina is viewed as a worse job than you are. Because they might have a worse roster than the Titans have, is because they have an incredibly reactive owner in David Tepper. But that is crazy to kind of put that into perspective of how many coaches have just been through that revolving door of a franchise. Eric Texan says, it's to explain Miss Amy's coach's firing. As a coach, you cannot say that you do not believe in a rebuild or that you'll be glad to coach a team as long as it can win. If I had an employee to make those type of public comments, I would fire him or her before the ink dried. At that point, there is no longer buy-in.
I mean, and listen, when those words were uttered, and it's not just those words, I think there were things behind the scenes as well. But when those words were uttered, what did I say? He don't think this team he don't think this team is capable of winning moving forward. He's not going to come out and say, I don't want the coaching job, or I'd rather be someone else. No, he's going to give you subtle hints on what he's thinking. And that subtle hint was, yeah, I want to coach this team. Hey, listen, as long as we can win, what do you mean as long as we can win? So you don't want, if we start losing, you don't want to be the coach. So you don't want to be the coach now. Those are things that you got. Those are small things you got to look at, I think, as if you're an owner. Words are everything in today's society. And if you don't know how to use those words properly or structure them properly when you're talking about certain things, then it leads one to believe that, hey, listen, you don't want this job really, because of what you just said, coupled with what you went up to New England and said. It doesn't seem like you really want to be the head coach of the Tennessee Titans anymore.
Well, also, I think all of this that we're talking about, what I would do if I were in those walls over for the Titans is I would try to change that perception. I would try to, I could over time. And you may not be able to do anything before you hire your next coach, but I would take note about how they're getting ranked and ask myself, why is that? This is Nashville, Tennessee. This is a great city. It's a growing city. You've got a great fan base. It's just a matter of bringing out the potential. You got a new stadium coming up. Like, there's some things to get excited about this job. And why is everybody writing that we're 6th or 7th? If I maybe Adam Strunk, I'd say let's work on that perception. And you got to look at yourself in the mirror a little bit.
I think that's, I think it's sports talk radio kind of content to have, off-season to-do lists for teams of what you need in the draft, what you need in free agency. And I think that's absolutely a conversation we'll have. I also want to come up with an Amy Adams Strunk to-do list of maybe a little bit of self-reflection, to your point, Willy, of how did we get to this point? How have we gone in the span of 2 years being the number 1 seed in the AFC to now that general manager that was in place is gone, that coach that was in place is gone, and now there are some, I think, fair questions arising about Amy Adams Strunk and how she runs this team and how she runs her team employees and the general manager and the head coach, that you gotta look in the mirror a little bit as far as Amy Adams Strunk is concerned, because she's gotten herself into this position. Glenn in Greenbrier Texan says, I'm damn tired of hearing the national media narrative about Vrabel. He may be respected, but his job was to win games. He lost 18 out of 24. Any other NFL franchise would have fired him. That's what I don't get, is can you not see on paper what the record was? He was losing games. I don't care how funny he was on Twitter or in podcasts or how great of a player he was with the Patriots. This was a bad team for the last 2 years.
And
Yeah,
I don't think people wants to wrap their it's hard for people to sort of wrap their minds around, you know, Vrabel being a bad coach, and well, Vrabel being a good coach, but also seeing the product on the field. You know, you're only as good as your last season, or in this case, you're only as good as your last games. And Vrabel hasn't been good this season, nor was he good last season. If this is a player, regardless of what the player had done in previous years, and we see it across the NFL, we see it across fan bases. If a player has a 2-year run the way that Mike Vrabel had, they're looking to move on. Everybody's screaming and crying. You need to draft somebody at that position, move on. If any other coach has seasons like this, 2 seasons where they missed the playoffs, where they've been horrible, people are screaming for them to lose their job. Hell, people are screaming for Mike McCarthy to lose his job, and he's won 36 games in the last 3 seasons. I get the playoff woes. I get it. People are wondering whether Mike Tomlin should get fired. This guy has done nothing but win at Pittsburgh. So all of a sudden, it's Mike Vrabel, he's lost. He's had a losing season the past 2 seasons, but it's not his fault. I don't get that part. You win together and you get praised as a head coach when you win. It should be the same way when you lose, especially when you have consecutive losing seasons.
I'm with you. I'm with you, D-Mase. I'm interested to get Tim Hasselbeck's perspective on this. How attractive of a job he thinks the Titans opening is, and maybe why do people not view this as a better job? We'll get into that with Tim Hasselbeck, ESPN NFL analyst, coming up next. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase, 1025, 1063, The Game. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase, 1025, 1063, The Game and the Game Nashville app. Got the Predators in action on the road tonight in LA. Puck drop 9 o'clock, late one tonight. We'll chat with Elliot Friedman about that in 1 hour. But joining us now is ESPN NFL analyst Tim Hasselbeck. Tim, I fear that you may have been facing the elements like we have been the last few days. You've been staying warm. Have you been staying ice and snow free?
I've been ice and snow free. I've been staying warm. My issue was that when this all started, I was not in Nashville, which means that I could not get back to Nashville, which is why I appreciate you guys rescheduling. You know, where I'm from, I think we handle 7 inches a little bit differently.
Plot out the way and get out there and go to work.
This is a beautiful spring day in New England, and it has shut down the city of Nashville for nearly a week now. But we appreciate your flexibility and glad that you got home safe, Tim. And we were looking at Mike Sando's article in The Athletic, and of 8 vacancies in the NFL, head coaching vacancies, New England included, he ranked the Tennessee Titans at 7th. Yahoo Sports has a piece coming out here later on today that ranks the 7 vacancies, not including New England, and the Titans are ranked 6th. Why do you think it is that maybe the perception of the Titans head coaching vacancy isn't a better one than those surveys might indicate?
I'm guessing that the reason is like what's there, meaning, okay, there's a general manager already there. So like that would not be good for somebody that wanted more control, or hey, there's going to be most likely, or at least at a minimum, competition at the quarterback position. So you're not walking into a situation where, you know, there's a quarterback that you know can play, or a quarterback on a rookie contract that you can build around. So that, or that you're sure that you can build around, I should say. And so I think probably, you know, those factors, and then, you know, people will get into the details of where the salary cap is. I would just kind of say this as people, you know, rank these spots. I would love to know where the Houston Texans were ranked in terms of coaching availabilities and priority lists a year ago, because I can't imagine it was at the very top.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. And I know that the Texans were so bad for so long, but I think a lot of Titans fans look at where the Texans were last season. Now the Texans are like the belle of the ball this season, and all it takes is bringing a good head coach with good coordinators and a really good quarterback in the draft. But you bring up the quarterback position, and that's something that Mike Sando referenced. That's something that is referenced in a Yahoo Sports article of uncertainty, or as you mentioned, competition at the quarterback position. What is it about Will Levis that maybe doesn't inspire a ton of confidence for some potential head coaches?
Well, I think the big thing would be this. He missed some time this year. So there's already, you know, I guess the evidence of, well, can he be healthy for an entire season? Like, one of the best things about, you know, quarterbacks and is just their availability. I know I've said this before, like my brother as the example. Look, he played whatever it was, 18, 20 years in the National Football League, in large part because he never ended a season on the injured reserve. Like that matters. Like Eli Manning, you look at his career, he was always available and healthy. And so, and then you compare that to other guys that maybe have talent and they've shown, you know, kind of moments where, hey, they could be really good. Jimmy Garoppolo, for example. But he just has too many times where he's not available. So like there's already evidence of that. And then there's not a big enough sample size of really good quarterback play to say, yeah, you're 100% sure that this can be your guy. And so I think that's really what it is. It's still the unknown. I would push back on anybody that says like, hey, they know for sure, because you really don't know for sure until, you know, you see a guy do it for multiple seasons.
I thought I knew for sure about Jordan Love.
Mm-hmm.
Learned my lesson.
Right? No, that's a great example, because his first start against Kansas City, whatever that was, a couple years ago, was not good at all. and then didn't really play. And then the beginning of the year was not great. And he looks so comfortable and confident and honestly good right now that you could almost argue he just looks like a totally different player.
Yeah, he does. And Tim, I was saying about Will Levis. It's just listen, this guy wasn't supposed to be the starter this year. I think Vrabel had in his mind that we're gonna ride with Ryan Tannehill as long as we possibly can because he gave them a better opportunity to win. But we understand that because of that offensive line, it didn't happen. And now you thrust a young guy into that position. And he has a wonderful first game, but we all knew that that wasn't sustainable. And he came down to earth, but he always showed you flashes. And that's what we want to see in young quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Are you showing me something that's going to make me, continue to believe that if we surround you with some good players, when we get this offensive line straight, then you could be the guy. I'm not saying he will be the guy, but surround him with some people, let him have an off season to really go over whatever offense they're going to implement, and then decide after that, after you see him in a full season, then decide, hey, he is the guy, or maybe we need to be looking for another quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying, D-Mase, I would agree with in that I think sometimes you see a guy play his rookie year and you can say, man, we're so far from being able to hand this over to you. And I think that there've probably been guys where that's been the case. And that's not the situation the Titans are in. I would agree with you in that I think there was enough evidence this year to think, you know what, there's enough to be excited about and kind of look forward to with him, that he's probably is going to be in a situation where he's at a minimum got a shot to compete for it. So, yeah, I think that is totally fair. And if he were to take advantage of that opportunity, win the job, and then do a good job with it, then that could happen. Think about what happened in Seattle with Russell Wilson. Like, Matt Flynn was really signed to be the starter, but it wasn't so prohibitive that you couldn't compete for the job. And then Russell won it. And then when he won it, he took advantage of it, and they were in a better spot as an organization because of it.
Yeah, you're right in that regards to listen, it doesn't have to be set in stone that he is the guy, but at least give him an opportunity to prove to you that he's not the guy. And I don't think he's done that just yet. We're talking with Tim Hasselbeck, ESPN NFL analyst and head coach at the Innsworth Tigers here in Nashville. Now,
I
Tim,
appreciate that, D-Mase. That's
no.
2 weeks in a row, man. That's 2 weeks in a row.
I'm gonna keep pumping it, man. I'm gonna keep pumping it. Looking at this team, this roster, and Charles Robinson was on with Rex and Robbie earlier, and he talked about a little about how possibly this could be a 49ers situation in regards to, you got to build the roster back up. You got a good head coach. You got a GM. It took a few years, but now they're one of the franchises that many look at as a model franchise in regards to their winning. And they've won Super Bowls in the past. We know that. But you're looking at the Titans roster, they're at the bottom now. They're at rock bottom now. You have an opportunity with a second-year GM, a head coach. Let's use this word again, collaborate. You can collaborate and start building this team the way you want it. And it may take a year, it may take two, but ultimately, if you build it the right way, then this is going to be something like San Francisco that's sustainable.
Look, I agree, and I think it's probably frustrating because you look around at the rest of the AFC and you think, well, hey, we want to be good right now. Like all these other, places that are good right now. But look, it's hard to just flip it in 1 year, but people will look at situations like Houston and say, well, hey, it's possible. But I don't think that you can look at those places as, the blueprints for, building it the way that you want to build it. And then I think the other aspect of it that is really important, which is why it's important for the head coach and the general manager to be guys that see things the same way, that are on the same page, is that you need to beat the market in the draft and free agency. And if the market beats you, then you just get crushed, right? And I think that's probably what happened with A.J. Brown, right? But and then you just look at situations like you bring the Niners up. Well, look, they beat the market with Deebo Samuel. They beat the market with George Kittle. They beat the market with their 2 inside backers. They obviously did a good job, wasn't free agency, but a trade with Christian McCaffrey. They clearly beat the market at quarterback with Brock Purdy. So now they didn't bat 1,000 because they drafted Trey Lance and gave a bunch of draft capital up for him. So I think that, you're not going to ever be perfect, but you need to beat the market in a bunch of these other spots because you are going to miss at times, like every organization does. And so, yeah, I think that ends up being, like, as we, kind of go back to how, Caroline started this, just about, hey, is this rank this opportunity? Look, there's a really good opportunity for a reset. You're not necessarily walking into a situation completely saddled with a ton. And that, in many regards, is probably more attractive than having something that's forced on you.
We're talking to Tim Hasselbeck. And Tim, I was just looking over some of the candidates here. And you've made some interesting points about how a person's stock can really rise and fall. A franchise's stock can rise and fall, but you have a perception that kind of sticks with you in the moment. Let's go back a few years. I would have thought, and I did say this at the time, and maybe I was a little bit biased because he had been at Vanderbilt for a while, and I got to know him a little bit when he was a younger coach. But Ken Whisenhunt, I thought when the Titans hired him as the head coach, was probably the most credentialed coach on the market at the time. He had been an offensive coordinator for a very successful Steelers team. He had taken a team to the Super Bowl as a head coach, offensive coordinator for a good Chargers team when he got the job, and it completely flopped. So I have that same feeling right now, and maybe I'm crazy, about Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, to me, is very similar to Whisenhunt. He's got a great track record. He's got success as a head coach, Super Bowl ring as a defensive coordinator for Seattle. And he's had a good run here as the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. If you take away the recency bias of that last act that they just had, his defense didn't look very good that day. But I see a lot of credentials there, but I don't hear a lot of buzz about him as a head coach.
So first off, I would say this. I would agree with you on Ken Whisenhunt. And to add to your list of why, it was hey, this makes a lot of sense. He was a former player that played a position that, knew about the passing game, knew about the run game, had a great rapport with players, was creative by nature in terms of, just ideas, and he wasn't just like a copycat type of coach. He was fantastic. And, I think sometimes you can just say, look, it doesn't really, it doesn't work out. So you look at Dan Quinn. So, did it work out in Atlanta? Well, obviously not how they wanted it to work out, but he's been really good a bunch of different times. And I bet you, I do think that his name is out there, just because, we're not hearing the names. I think sometimes we hear the names that are newer names, Ben Johnson, Mike Kafka, guys like that, their names have not been in the hiring cycle, in previous years. And I think there is a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it's, that individual's agent that wants to make sure that they know that their client is on the radar now and is in the mix now. Whereas if it's been somebody that has been in the mix, you don't hear their name as much. Like Terrell Austin's a good example of that. He's been a coach in the NFL for a long time, been a coordinator for a long time, had a lot of success. I think that a lot of people want to talk to him and would consider hiring him. But he's been through a bunch of interviews. And so I think that his buzz, maybe isn't what, one of these guys that's a new name in the cycle, maybe generates, while this happens. So I think that Dan Quinn is absolutely somebody that anybody that has an opening, including a team like the Seahawks, should consider.
I was going to ask you, because he did an interview with the Titans yesterday, and specifically, where do you think it went wrong for Quinn in the post Super Bowl? Because I looked, some people may not remember this, because it's easy to say, well, they lost that Super Bowl and they were never the same. But they did come back with a good year the next year and won a playoff game that year, and then kind of leveled off. So what do you think went wrong with Dan Quinn's run in Atlanta?
Well, I mean, I think his quarterback got older. I think that was part of the issue. And I just would kind of say this, like, there's 32 teams. One wins it all, right? So, like, 31 other teams are disappointed. And I do think sometimes, like, the standard, like, Sean Payton's won one Super Bowl. Mike McCarthy's won one Super Bowl. Like, there are a lot of these coaches that they have won one Super Bowl. So, like, does that mean when they got knocked out in a divisional round or a wild card round and, nobody's really paying attention to the fact that, their left guard, got knocked out week 17 and then they were playing some kid off the street who was completely overmatched. Like, no one goes back and remembers that. And I will say I'll never forget listening to an interview from Bill Parcells talk about why he lost the Super Bowl against the Green Bay Packers. And, like, I don't know, like, I think I was maybe expecting to say, like, hey, we couldn't contain, Favre or this and that. And he's like, our L5 on kickoff was out of the game. And was like, wait a second, what? Like, he's literally talking about, like, while, like, when we watch games on TV, we're running promotions for whatever, CSI Miami, you know what I mean? People barely paying attention. And he's saying, like, look, our L5 was out of the game and we gave up a kickoff return because the guy who was in his spot, didn't make the play. And so, like, that would be one more Super Bowl maybe for Bill Parcells, at least in his mind. And so I think sometimes we just have a standard for what Dan Quinn's success should be, or Mike McCarthy's, or Sean Payton's, or whomever's, Pete Carroll's, that is maybe just unrealistic.
Okay, so let's roll that into something else you mentioned, because you have a Dan Quinn who's got a history, right? But he's got experience. There's ups, there's downs, but he's had a lot of experience. But you just mentioned another huge dynamic that happens every year. And Bobby Slowick, to me, would be the headliner this year. It's a guy that can't do anything wrong. He's the hot name. Everybody's talking about him. But how do you try to weigh that when you're interviewing a guy like that to know that he's really the right guy to be a first-time head coach? Because that's tricky, because I've seen some hot names that got jobs and then just never did anything.
Here's what I would say, and I think I've said this to you guys before. John Fox, who has taken, what did he take, 2 different teams to a Super Bowl? Is that right? 2 different teams to a Super Bowl, which there is a really short list of people on the planet that have ever done that. So he went with the Broncos and he went with the Carolina Panthers. He said to me one time, I spent a lot of time with him when we worked together at ESPN, and he said, and he was the defensive coordinator at the Giants when they went to a Super Bowl. And he said to me, it's interesting. A lot of times you get a head coaching position in the National Football League because you are a great coordinator. And he said, part of the thing about becoming a coordinator is you a lot of times sit in a dark room, watch film, design a game plan, and then only implement it with one side of the ball. He said, and then because you've done that, you become a head coach somewhere. You get an opportunity, you're the hot name, and you get hired as a head coach. And then the thing that you were really good at doing, you don't do anymore. You just don't do it. And you then are basically, and I'll use different words, he said, then you are just shoveling manure all day long. in your new role as head coach. That's what you do all day. And so it just kind of was interesting to me. I felt like walking away from that conversation with him, I thought, I think as a league, we probably place too much emphasis on, are you good at devising a game plan? Are you a creative coordinator? Are you is that important? Sure. I think you've got to have creative ideas. But if you boil it down to, are you a good coordinator and you're not good at managing people, good at have an extensive network of other coaches? Do you listen to other people's ideas? Do you create an environment that is, unselfish and hardworking? All these other things that maybe don't go into, hey, are you a good coordinator? And if you don't do those things well, then you're probably not going to be successful as a coach.
Interesting. That's an interesting perspective. And last one for me, Tim, quickly. I think we all know that Mike Vrabel is very widely respected around the league, and I think he's known as a good coach. Why hasn't he gotten any interest in interviewing for these head coaching vacancies across the league?
Yeah, I think that, again, he would be a guy, because he's been a head coach, that if he talks to somebody, I don't know that everybody in his camp will be making sure that everybody knows about it immediately. And then I think there might be a perspective from his part to say, I might just take a breath here. I don't need to go chase the first opportunity that's out there for me. I mean, I don't know that, but I do think that there are times that guys are finishing up being head coaches somewhere and they're exhausted. Bill Polian said one time they counted, and I think Tony Dungy had more media appearances than the president of the United States by 27 times in any given calendar year. And he's like, the demands on these positions are significant, and guys are tired at the end of the year. And I think sometimes are okay with taking a breath.
I know sometimes we do, compare a before and after when you get elected into office as the president, and then 8 years later when you're done in office and you see the gray hair and the wrinkles. We need to do that with a head coach in the NFL, because I'm sure the stress is it weighs on you, I'm sure. Tim Hasselbeck.
Hey, I had hair. I had hair 3 weeks ago before I became head coach. It's amazing.
3 weeks at the high school level, man.
Already.
Hey, Tim, you look even better now than you did 3 weeks ago.
Man.
Oh, I appreciate it. Don't do it before and after on me. It won't be pretty.
Tim, we appreciate it. We'll chat with you next week, and thanks for being flexible with us. Stay warm out there.
See you guys.
All right, we'll react to what Tim had to say there, and of course, get back into your phones. 615-737-1025 is the phone number. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase. We're brought to you by Zen Sports, and we love our people over at Zen Sports. Start earning cash rewards on your bets today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and in Tennessee to bet.
Slowick to me would be the headliner this year. It's a guy that can't do anything wrong. He's the hot name. Everybody's talking about him. But how do you try to weigh that when you're interviewing a guy like that to know that he's really the right guy to be a first-time head coach? Because that's tricky, because I've seen some hot names that got jobs and then just never did anything.
Here's what I would say, and I think I've said this to you guys before. John Fox, who has taken, what did he take, 2 different teams to a Super Bowl? Is that right? 2 different teams to a Super Bowl, which there is a really short list of people on the planet that have ever done that. So he went with the Broncos and he went with the Carolina Panthers. He said to me one time, I spent a lot of time with him when we worked together at ESPN, and he said, and he was the defensive coordinator at the Giants when they went to a Super Bowl. And he said to me, it's interesting. A lot of times you get a head coaching position in the National Football League because you are a great coordinator. And he said, part of the thing about becoming a coordinator is you a lot of times sit in a dark room, watch film, design a game plan, and then only implement it with one side of the ball. He said, and then because you've done that, you become a head coach somewhere. You get an opportunity, you're the hot name, and you get hired as a head coach. And then the thing that you were really good at doing, you don't do anymore. You just don't do it. And you then are basically, and I'll use different words, he said, then you are just shoveling manure all day long in your new role as head coach. That's what you do all day. And so it just kind of was interesting to me. I felt like walking away from that conversation with him, I thought, I think as a league, we probably place too much emphasis on, are you good at devising a game plan? Are you a creative coordinator? Are you is that important? Sure. I think you've got to have creative ideas. But if you boil it down to, are you a good coordinator and you're not good at managing people, good at have an extensive network of other coaches? Do you listen to other people's ideas? Do you create an environment that is, unselfish and hardworking? All these other things that maybe don't go into, hey, are you a good coordinator? And if you don't do those things well, then you're probably not going to be successful as a coach.
That was Tim Hasselbeck on with us in the last segment. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase. Tune in to 94.9 The Fan today for Vanderbilt women's basketball. Tip-off time has changed. So the Commodores will be at home taking on Auburn with a new tip-off time of 2 p.m. and pregame beginning at 1:45 p.m. Coverage is also available on the 94.9 The Fan app and at 949thefan.com. So the reason why I wanted to play that clip coming back is because I think it was an interesting perspective from Tim. That what's the new trend in the NFL? We know that the NFL is so trendy that what one team does works, then 31 other teams in the NFL want to follow suit. The new trendy thing in the NFL is hiring the hottest offensive coordinator on the market, whether that's a Ben Johnson or a Bobby Slowick or a Brian Callahan. Some of the coaches that the Titans are interviewing. But Tim's perspective is, look, sometimes when you're a really good offensive coordinator, taking on that next bigger role of being essentially a manager of the team, now your role has grown so much. Maybe one, you're not ready for it, or maybe two, you kind of lose what you're so good at. So I think it's a really interesting perspective. But the one hole that I'll poke in that argument that I want to hear your thoughts on is, when you talk about that, you talk about kind of more of a leader head coach. I think about Dan Campbell. And of course, a great football mind, a great offensive mind, but in Detroit, he really does kind of feel like that rah kind of guy that brings the team together, that he is the face of the team. What happens when Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, the defensive and offensive coordinators in Detroit, respectively, what happens when they leave? Does Dan Campbell have an offensive system in place that he can continue on and has a tree of offensive coordinators and that next person in line to serve as that next OC? That when you do have that kind of not necessarily offensive coordinator savvy head coach, and it's more of a leader of men. It's more of the face of the franchise. It's more of a CEO of the team. Then when you lose your coordinators, your X's and O's guys, that might leave you in a really vulnerable position.
Well, I mean, it's true. Look at what happened in New England. You have a great head coach that sort of is of the defensive mind, but he's still no offenses. He's been cycling through his coordinators for the last couple of years. And where has that gotten the New England Patriots? Is gotten them to, now have a top one of the, top 3 or 4 picks in the National Football League. It has gotten a head coach who we consider as the greatest head coach in the National Football League fired from his position. So, when you do put a head coach in place, whether it's an offensive or defensive guy, I think he has to have the ability to also be a leader of men, because after it's all said and done, once the X's and O's, once you start changing offensive coordinators, because don't make no mistake about it, that whoever gets the coordinator job, say if it's not an offensive minded coach that gets the head coaching job for the Tennessee Titans, whoever he hires, if he does well, he will then be looking for another offensive coordinator and or defensive coordinator. So you have to not only know offenses and defenses, you got to be able to lead men. At the end of the day, can I lead you to a victory? If I can do that, then I'm good, because offensive coordinators, they come and they go, not because we want to fire them, but because if they do a good job, they're going to get another job somewhere else, whether it's in the NFL as a head coach or in the collegiate level as a head coach. But you have to have a system, something in place that you don't deviate too far from it. New England had it for a long time, regardless of what offensive coordinator they put in place, because they had Tom Brady.
Yeah,
When
Tom
they didn't
Brady was
have
the
Tom,
OC.
exactly, he was the OC. You can do that when you have a Peyton Manning. No matter who the OC is, Peyton Manning is the guy that's pulling the trigger. He's the guy that's throwing the ball and figuring things out. When you don't have that guy, and you have a strictly offensive minded coach or a defensive minded coach, when things start to change within your coaching staff, you may run into some problems if you're not a leader of men, if you're not a true leader that can push through certain things. If you're not that type of guy, then you're going to find yourself looking for a new job.
It's interesting you mentioned Dan Campbell, Caroline, because he was never any kind of coordinator. He was a tight ends coach a couple of times, interim head coach for a short period of time in Miami. But he went from being a player to on a coaching staff. But he wasn't a hot coordinator that led a really interesting offense or innovative offense. So I do think we get caught up in that a little too much, and that's where Tim, I think, was going a little bit. So that, to me, it's a really intriguing part of the search. And I keep going back to what Derek is saying. I'm with him that you have to visualize what this person is going to be like when he is running the entire operation, and not, hey, I'm bringing these interesting offensive ideas. Now, Slowick, he does have experience as a defensive coach. When he came into the league, his first job was on the defensive side on a Mike Shanahan team. He's also got experience in like an analytics field. So I think he brings more to the table than just he's got a hot offense with a fun new quarterback right now. But that's what you have to weed through. But I think at the end of the day, it's got to come back to, can this guy do all the things that Tim was just describing, shoveling the you-know-what, right? Because that is part of the job. It's not just, hey, I'm the head coach, let's go work on the offensive game plan, and I'll hire the defensive coach and everything will be all right. It's not that simple.
And I think and that's why I brought up Dan Campbell, is he's not one of those, hot young offensive coordinators like Sean McVay that has hair gel in his hair. Like he's more of a, and I think the example that keeps coming to my mind is Ed Orgeron at LSU. that he was the rah-rah guy, that he got everyone motivated, that he could be the face of the team and got everyone up and ready to go and delegated the X's and O's to the coordinators and to the quarterback. And when those coordinators left, when the quarterback left, he had 2 losing seasons and got fired a year and a half later. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to Dan Campbell, but when Dan Campbell doesn't have those coordinators that I believe, all deem as really good coaches, both Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, then how will we view Dan Campbell?
Okay, that's a great question. All right, but my answer to that would be, if you are a guy that people rally around and a guy that people want to work for, he will find good people to replace. That's where you want to be. You want to be that program that is developing good coordinators that are getting head coaching jobs. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me is how you keep the cycle going. Like, you can't have the mindset as a leader of, well, oh man, I lost my defensive coordinator and my offensive coordinator. Now we're in trouble. Like, I think you look around and say, okay, now who's the next bright mind, or who do I have on my staff that's ready to come up there? Like, if you're a guy that wants that is a good leader and people want to work for that guy, I think that helps you stem those bridges.
It's a lot of coordinator turnover. If you bring in a new OC, are you now bringing in a new offense? Does your quarterback have to learn a new offense? Let's look at that from the Titans' perspective. Will Levis had 2 different coordinators in 2 years at Kentucky, came into the league, had to learn Tim Kelly's offense. Now, in 4th time in 4 years, he'll have a new offensive coordinator and need to learn a new offense. So that's a lot of shakeup. That's a lot of inconsistency. And if you find the right guys, if you find the right coordinators and continue to build those relationships, and let's be honest, maybe get a little bit lucky here and there, then great. But what are the odds of you finding those coordinators on both sides of the ball every 2 to 3 years, whenever those new coordinators inevitably get other opportunities? That's why I lean more toward the offensive savvy coordinator mind. So you at least have that consistency from the top.
It's definitely part of the gig. Derek, let me ask you, is there any scenario in your mind where a coach could come in, for all the reasons that Caroline said about Levis, he's had to learn different offenses, that you would consider keeping Kelly as the offensive coordinator, so you have that continuity?
Good question.
I would interview him. I definitely would interview him, and he would, unless I had someone else in mind that I wanted to bring in with me. If I am, say if I'm Dan Quinn, I would definitely interview him and see if, what I'm thinking sort of is in line with what he's thinking as a coordinator. So I wouldn't, poo-poo it. I mean, I think Tim Kelly is a good play caller. I don't think you can put the blame on Tim Kelly this year in regards to the offensive woes. I think he worked with what he had, and he did the best with what he had. And at times it looked good, and at times, more times than not, it looked horrible. But I don't think it was because of Tim Kelly and his play calling. So if I'm the next head coach in this sort of scenario, if I'm Dan Quinn, yeah, I would interview Tim Kelly and seriously think about retaining him as offensive coordinator, as well as Charles London.
One name that I've heard, I think Jared brought it up and TD has talked about it a lot too, that I would be totally on board with, Liam Cohen. Liam Cohen was Will Levis's offensive coordinator in his first year at Kentucky, his best year at Kentucky. And then the next year, Liam Cohen goes to the Rams. We kind of saw Will Levis take a little bit of a step back. So bringing in Liam Cohen, he's part of that Sean McVay tree. He runs that West Coast style of offense. He's familiar with Will Levis. Will Levis is familiar with him. So it kind of going along that same lines of, if you don't want to keep throwing new coordinators at Will Levis, that could be one kind of bringing him back and got a lot out of him, at least at the college level. So that's one at least to think about. All right, coming up next, want to get back into your phones on this. 615-737-1025 is the phone number. Plus, we got some crybabies in college basketball. We'll get to that coming up next. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase. Tune in to 93.3 Classic Hits tonight for MTSU men's basketball. The Blue Raiders are on the road facing UTEP with pregame beginning at 7:30 p.m. and tip-off is at 8 p.m. Coverage is also available on the 93.3 Classic app and at 933classichits.com.
I'm a big believer in, you win the right way, you lose the right way. And, I always tell my guys, whether you win or lose, you win the right way. You lose the right way, you carry yourself the right way. You don't go through the handshake line or prior to getting to the handshake line and have about 6 or 7 guys putting the horns down. We don't do that, because when you do those kind of things, it looks very classless, and it also looks like you were just hoping to win. We never go into games trying to hope to win. We go into games expecting to win. So we don't act like that. We expect to win. We don't jump up and down act like we won a national championship. We sure don't step on anyone's home court deal and act crazy and try to show them up in any way. We don't do that. So that's what I was angry about. And I was letting those guys know you don't do that. You guys won. Hey, we shake your hand, tip our hat to you, but we're not going to let you act that way in our building. You're not going to do that. You're not going to put your horns down and do all that nonsense.
Hey, that was Texas basketball coach Rodney Terry. So Texas lost to UCF 77-71 last night, and in his post-game press conference, was all hot and bothered at some UCF players throwing the horns down toward the Texas bench. Let me just say, that is such a crybaby, boo-hoo thing to say. Want to know the best way for people to not taunt you and for people to not embarrass you? Beat them! Beat them! To complain about an innocent hand gesture, I think is so crybaby, and gear up for the SEC. Because if you've ever been to a Tennessee tailgate as an opposing fan, there's going to be a whole lot more disrespect thrown your way than simply just some horns down.
But if it's the fans, that's one thing. But if I were a coach and my guys won a game like that, the last thing that I would be telling them to do would be to throw the horns down and taunt after the game and the handshake line. So I think that is classless for UCF to have done that. And I think it's an indication of where the college game is going. I just think when you have programs that you have the same players for 2, 3, 4 seasons in a row, and you build a program and you can talk about principles like that, you see a lot less of that. And now when you got half a new team every year, I think you have more teams that are prone to do stuff like that. I thought that was low grade. Now, if I'm a head coach for Texas, right, that might really bug me. It would bug any coach. The question is, do you go public with it? Do you say something in the moment, which he did, and then say something in the press conference, which he did? I think some coaches would keep it to themselves, or maybe even send a note to the opposing team's coach and say, Coach, just want to let you know your guys did this, just so you can do whatever you want to do about it. You can do nothing, but I'm just letting you know that happened, right? Because it would bother me, but I get it a little bit. But look, I think it's a legit point. I don't think you should do that after a game.
I'm with you, Caroline. Cry me a river, man.
Wah.
Listen, UCF. I mean, it's not like you beat a top-ranked Texas team. This team is 12-5, 1-3 in the division. You're 2-2, 11-5. So technically, in the division, you are better than them. So you should have expected this. But listen, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Willie, and you're right from this respect. That's something that the Texas coach should have addressed with UCF's head coach. I don't think he should have came out in public, because now it makes him look like a whiner. It makes him look like a sore loser. You're pointing at that specific thing when you should have been pointing at your team, and, they should have played better. Because them putting the horns down had nothing to do with y'all losing that game. That's just a byproduct of y'all losing the game. And you got to understand, listen, Texas program, not just the basketball team, Texas program is a big program. So when you beat a Texas team and you're a UCF or any other, team out there that is not considered a top-ranked team, whether it's basketball or football, you're going to throw up the horns down. You're going to do it. Why? Because they've normalized it now. This is not the first time that the horns have been, upside down. They've been upside down for a very long time. You see football players doing it when they beat the Longhorns. So this is not a new problem. To me, that's something you should have addressed with the head coach of UCF, Should have had a nice conversation with them and told them how much you didn't appreciate it. But I'm with you, Caroline. If you want to stop it, then you beat them. That's all you do. Just go
Trash
out
talk,
there and beat
I'll
them.
tell you this.
Trash talking is a part of the game.
and it's
It
been part of the
happens.
game since
And
the
it's
beginning
not going
of time.
anywhere. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. So it just makes them. I understand what you're saying, Willie, but it makes them seem like a sore loser. Like
Yeah.
you're picking that out of all things. You know, do you say anything to your players when they're talking trash on the court to other teams that they're beating or big? Let them play. Let them play Oklahoma, who's a rival. You know, and see what happens in that game if you end up winning. So you got to kind of balance it out.
I will tell you this.
Uh-huh.
If you did that at the end of a hockey game, you better believe that there's going to be a fight.
But you know that going into that.
You know that going in. But let me tell you, but also, you're not allowed to fight in college basketball. But that's how a fight breaks out. Somebody does something like that, and a guy gets ticked off because he's lost the game, and you get into a shoving match, and then somebody says something. The next thing you know, you got a melee, which does happen still on occasion in college basketball. That's why you don't do that stuff. I'll give you an example last night. Auburn goes in and thumps Vanderbilt. They embarrassed Vanderbilt. They won the game. The game was over at halftime. But Auburn decides, as the clock is running out and Vanderbilt stops playing defense, that right as the clock expires, it was right after the clock. He waited for the buzzer, but then they decided to do a little fun thing for the fans and throw a ball off the backboard and dunk it. Totally unnecessary. And that's the kind of thing that starts a fight. Like, because if I'm in that Vanderbilt uniform and I was mad watching it on TV out in Los Angeles, 2,000 miles away, I'd be ready to get it in somebody's face and say, you don't do that in our building. You guys just won the game. Get off the court and enjoy your victory. You don't do that. That's how I was taught to be, a sportsman and that kind of thing. And I remember my teammate Kevin Anglin, Kentucky, the 92 team that lost the Christian Leitner game. Really good team. Rick Pitino, very respected team. The only time they beat us at Memorial Gym when I was there, that group beat us. And it was not a great Vanderbilt team. It was an NIT team. But they ran an alley-oop at the buzzer when we stopped playing defense. We conceded. The game was over. They decided to run an alley-oop to John Pelfrey, and Kevin Anglin got right in John Pelfrey's face after the game and said, you do not do that. That's not the way you play. And he let him know in no uncertain terms. I'm just saying that when you're a competitor, that's how fights break out when you do stuff like that. So I don't blame the Texas coach for acting like that.
And I get it.
But again, it's what you're describing are on the court things. Like you don't take a last second 3-pointer when you're up 50 points. You don't throw the ball off the backboard, even though I know time expired. Those are the things that are really showing up, your competitor. But when you throw the horns down or, you do some other type of gesture, I mean, listen, if you want it to stop, because it's coming, if you lose, somebody's going to throw the horns upside down. It's coming. If you want to stop it, beat them. That's my thing. Just beat them. If you don't want a person celebrating, then you go out there and you stop. You don't want a person scoring 50 points on you or dancing in the end zone when he scores a touchdown. You know what? Don't let him get in the end zone and don't let him score 50 points.
Back to Arthur Smith. It's like Arthur Smith, right? I totally get why he was upset when you're in the kneel down formation.
But that was something different. That was totally something different.
You don't do that. You don't
exactly.
do that.
You're right about that. You're right about that. Even though I believe
Arthur Smith for being upset at the guy. That's how you should react.
But I think that's different.
Exactly.
That's
in play.
That is, the Falcons were in victory formation and the Saints ran it in the end zone anyway. I think that is unwritten rule of football. But in terms of, throwing a horns down or, whatever other gesture, making fun of another team that you might beat in college sports or in professional sports, if I'm Rodney Terry, I don't, after the game, send a strongly worded email to the UCF coach and say, hey, that wasn't very nice. Don't do that. I talk to my own players and say, you don't like that? You felt embarrassed? Play better. Play harder, beat them, and they won't do it because I guarantee you, That is not the first time that they've gotten that, and it's not going to be the last time. And I almost feel bad for that team because I feel like their coach now put kind of a target on their backs. And every team now has heard this clip that's gone viral on Twitter, that's gone viral on social media. Now they're just adding even more fuel to the fire. I think the best way to get people to stop doing it is, one, stop crying about it, and two, win your games. That's how I feel about it. All right, Elliot Friedman, Sportsnet and 32 Thoughts podcast will join us coming up next. The Predators are taking on the LA Kings tonight. We'll get Elliot's thoughts on that, plus their doings and happenings around the NHL. Elliot Friedman coming up next. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase, 1025, 1063, The Game. And Willy, D-Mase, 1025, 1063, the game and the game Nashville app. Predators in action tonight in LA, taking on the Kings. Late puck drop tonight, 9 o'clock puck drop local time. So if you're snowed in tonight, which it looks like a lot of us are going to be, probably in Nashville, hey, you got a Predators game to watch tonight. Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet and the 32 Thoughts podcast will join us shortly. One question that I did want to ask Elliot, just from a more national perspective and having a better, just kind of vibe of the rest of the NHL. What grade would he give Andrew Brunette and the Nashville Predators now that we are just over halfway point through the season?
That'd be an interesting question. I would love to hear his response. Considering where we thought this team would be, how they finished last season, I would give him a C. It's maybe a C plus, but
Tough
definitely
grader,
a C.
D-Mase.
Definitely a C. I don't think this team has. I think there's more to this team than what we're seeing, and they got to find a way to unlock it consistently. You see it in spurts, and then all of a sudden you see them, get beat and they don't play well. But they got to find out how to unlock that to make it more consistent. And, that's tasked to the head coach to try to figure out that. So I give him a C plus. I think he's doing a good job, but obviously, in this business, you could be doing better. But I do believe there's something there that they can unlock, and they haven't been able to unlock it on a consistent basis.
I just got chills, and I flash back to, that worst feeling that you can ever have in school when you're pass the test back out. Here, I graded the tests. Here are your tests. And everybody's
when the teacher puts yours face down and it's a bad sign. Like, ooh, man.
You go in thinking, I think I did well in this test. I think that I did well. And they give you the test back. You got a C. Like, what? A C? I had an A. Come on. I aced that thing. What are you talking about, Professor? Come on. But I think I would say I would go B plus based on the expectations. I think I'm very encouraged with the progress they've made, and the reason I go higher than D-Mase, I think the head coach doesn't have a ton of control on how well the goalie plays. Mm-hmm. Goalies can run hot and cold, and I think one of the things you were thinking as you take over the Predators is you have a special goaltender, and not a lot of teams can say that. But that special goaltender hasn't been special to this point, not by his standards. And so I think you take all that and you consider that they're in a good dogfight for a playoff spot. They're by no means in, but they're in that pack of teams that have a chance to be in the playoffs. I think that's that. And I completely agree with you, D-Mase. There's another level they're going to have to get to make it. And so you're that professor that wants everybody to keep driving. Like, hey, be satisfied with what you've done. I'm giving you a C because there's room for improvement. I get that. No question about it. But I do think that Brunette, what he has set out to do, most part they've been able to do. But I think the big question too is how do the youngsters continue to grow when it keeps getting tougher as that season goes on? It gets tougher and tougher to score and succeed. Everybody's pushing for you. Can they keep growing?
I think I would give them a B. I can't quite go B plus. I'm not as tough as a grader as D-Mase. I'm glad I didn't take your classes in school, D-Mase.
Hey, I gave you a C plus. I mean, come on now.
You're average plus. I give him a B, and I think it's for two main reasons. You bring up Saros. I almost give Andrew Brunette more credit and more benefit of the doubt because UC Saros hasn't been playing at the Superman level that maybe we've expected UC Saros to look like. That it's not just a slow start and then he kind of finds his footing and he does the most electric and mind-boggling things every night. We haven't been getting that, yet you still are winning games. And if you would have told me in September, October, that UC Saros in the middle of January would have right at a 900 save percentage, I would think, oh boy, like, eesh, this Preds team is probably in for a doozy of a season, but they're not. And he does have a 900 save percentage, but the rest of the team has looked better and has been elevated. That top line looks pretty legit. That Philip Forsberg is playing some of the best hockey, if not the best hockey of his career. So I almost give Andrew Brunette more credit for that, for being able to bring out that next level in Philip Forsberg, to unlock something in Philip Forsberg that maybe we've been wanting to see over the last couple of seasons. The reason why I can't quite get to B plus, A minus, A, inconsistencies. They're up, they're down, and some of that does have to do with the goaltending. But you win one, you look great, and then you might lose a couple, and then you win a couple. And I think that's the nature of having some young players that are coming into their own. That is the nature of having a new team with new pieces, with a new head coach and a new system. And I think also what I still want to see, and what we've seen flashes of, but I want to see, again, the theme, more consistency, is the young guys. Is the production from the young guys that, all right, I see flashes of you being, showing the potential to be great, but I don't think that you can quite get there yet unless I see it on a close to more night in, more night out basis.
Yeah, it's not a full roster by any stretch. Here's the other side of the coin, right? When John Hines was sort of overachieving with a lot of these guys last year, and this is before they brought in O'Reilly and Nyquist, which I thought, as it turned out, really good moves to kind of change the whole locker room, change the serial winners kind of thing that Barry Trotz has been pushing. When I would say, hey, look how they're doing with John Hines and sort of overachieving with these young guys when they've traded off four veteran players, which is what they did. The counter argument by some, which was, hey, UC Saros is elevating them. Don't kid yourself here. He's the reason that they're able to overachieve.
Yeah.
And I think there was certainly something to that argument. I have to not acknowledge that. But Andrew Brunette is not getting that bump. So that's why some people would downgrade what Hines did. Maybe Barry Trotz himself was saying, okay, Hines did a good job, but I think we can still go in a different direction and be better off because Hines was benefiting from great goaltending. So I don't know, certainly you can do things as a coach and as a system to help your goaltender, but ultimately you are at the mercy of your goaltender, and there's not, you can't control everything. That's why a lot of times, like, why did the Oilers fire Jay Woodcroft early in the season? Part of it was because the goalies could not save anything, and so sometimes you get victimized with that. And when the goalie starts playing better, the coach all of a sudden looks like a genius. But that's why I think Brunette's done a good job, because he hasn't gotten bad goaltending by any stretch. He just hasn't had the elite goaltending that everybody kind of thought he had going in. And yet they've been successful.
And I think the Hines argument, the point of it was, are you winning games because you have a good coach, or are you winning games because you're getting bailed out by the goaltender? It's an argument that we've had for the longest time, and I know Robbie has had it for the longest time as a Packer fan, as far as it pertained to Matt LaFleur. Right. Well, is Matt LaFleur a good coach, or does he just have one of the best quarterbacks on the planet in Aaron Rodgers? And I think it's a fair argument when you have a coach that doesn't have a massive body of work and is getting all-world elite play from one of your more important players, whether it's on the ice, whether it's on the field. But it is crazy to me, though. I think the Predators are, in terms of standings, in terms of the playoff picture, in a very similar place that they were in last year. But how different the vibe is. And it's all based off of expectations. That I see a bunch of texts in our text line right now saying, dang, D-Mase, well, what did you expect? They told us not to have many expectations. That's really what changes things, is that the expectations from the jump were, hey, we want to be great. We don't know how great we can be. That even though this time last year, if you were in a very similar position, there were probably Predators fans that were miserable. You're in the same place, technically, in the standings-ish, give or take a few points here and there, or give and take a few games here and there, but you're kind of in a very similar position, but it just feels so different just because of the expectations.
Well,
on a scale.
Yeah, listen, having the expectations, I understand. I get the expectations of the Nashville Predators coming into the season, and yes, based upon their record and them being in the second position of the wild card. Yes, many would look at it as, oh, you've achieved more than what we thought. But if you look at the players on their team, their roster, if I'm a head coach, I would tend to believe there's more out there. There's more that we can achieve, because one night we look like one of the best teams in hockey, and then for some strange reason, another night we look like one of the worst teams in hockey. And I know we're not one of the worst teams in hockey. We're so leaning more toward the other way. Not to say that I think the Nashville Predators are a top 5 team. No, what I'm saying is that yes, we've reached expectations, or we exceeded the expectations, but just because we've exceeded the expectations doesn't mean me as a coach don't think we can do better.
Yeah.
Or me as a player looking at that team, as a person looking at that team that I've played on professional teams, there's still something else there that they can unlock, and they need to unlock it. This is not the furthest they can go as a team, I don't believe. Now, if it is, then okay, great. But I don't believe this is as far as this team can go. I think they can go even further. And a part of it is UC Soros playing consistently. How can you get him to play more consistently? Because if he was the UC that we knew of last season, that his win percentage was in 90 in the 90s or high 90s, mid to high 90s, this would be a much different team. So how do we unlock that?
Yeah. I mean, that next level is kind of piecing all of it together. We have a couple thoughts on this in our text line driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. 615-737-1025 is the phone number. Dustin in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Willie, hold on to your hat. Saros has been awful. Lankinen should be our number 1 goaltender as of now. Wins or wins. Saros isn't consistently stopping goals.
Well, I grant him that if you look at the last few starts, Lankinen has given them a great lift. He's played really well against very, very tough teams. Askarov gave him a lift in the one game that he got to play because Lankinen was sick. So I think you're taking a snapshot, and emotionally, if you're in the moment, you kind of feel that way. But if you look at big picture, I think that's where you have to trust that an elite goaltender like UC Saros will come out of the storm, and it'll be okay. I don't know if I've said that, right? And then he followed up an excellent performance, a win against the Islanders, with a so-so performance against a really good team in Vegas. And let's keep in mind that Vegas is a dominant team. They're the defending champions. But a great game from UC Saros might have gotten the Predators points in that game. Who knows? But I still think that over time, you'll see that Saros will be fine. But so to say that Lankinen should be the starting goalie, period, no way. But do you try to work Lankinen in there a little bit more, take some of the workload off of Saros as they get him through this? These are the questions that I think they're dealing with right now. How do you try to deal with that?
I think that's the question. And I think, too, like a backup quarterback, the most popular guy on the team is the backup goaltender when the starting goaltender isn't playing very well. And I have to wonder, is Lankinen, when he gets an opportunity, does he play so well because he is so fresh and so rested? Is this kind of up and down performance from Saros that we've seen over the entirety of the season because he might be overworked? Because I have to ask myself, whenever we see slow starts from UC Saros, I think we have enough of a sample size to say, okay, he's a slow starter. Let's just get through this, and then he'll start to find his groove. Now my question is, where is this coming from? That we're now in January and we're seeing Saros look like vintage Saros, and then we see flashes of UC Saros not having his best stuff. What's the root of that problem? And if I had the answer to that, I'd probably be making a whole lot more money than I am now. But I do have to wonder how much of that is just use.
I think that's a fair thing. He is a guy that is right at the top of the list of the most used goalies. And this is during an era that a lot of the trends and numbers would suggest that you should play your starting goalie a little bit less of the percentage of games than you used to. Like, for example, when Terry Crisp was leading the Calgary Flames to the Stanley Cup, in that day and age, it was not uncommon for you to play your starting goalie about 70 of the 82 games. And it was a rare time. We're like, wait a minute. Because Crispy would say, unless his goalie was Mike Vernon, a great goaltender. And unless Mike Vernon barely could walk to the building, he would assume Mike Vernon is going in. It was Mike Vernon unless for some reason it couldn't be Mike Vernon. Now it's a lot more, I think, scientific. And let's look at the rest. Let's look at the workload. Let's look at what the numbers tell us. But yet UC Saros has been so good, and he has thrived, that they have used him a lot more. But maybe I think that's something they're looking at. The other thing I look at too is I do think he's been snake bit some by some bad luck with the goals going off of his own guy, breakdowns like that, where just a little bit of victim of bad bounce. But not to make excuses for him, I think he would tell you that he can play better, and he needs to play better if they're going to make it.
Another texter says it's always going to be tougher to win when the guy that you rely on, like Saros, doesn't play up to expectations. Doesn't mean there needs to be a change. He just needs to pick it up for this team to accomplish their goals.
Yeah, it's like when if Greg Maddux or Tom Glavine, goes through a stretch of 6 or 8 starts where they're not shutting people down, and these are Cy Young Award guys, right? You expect 7 innings of 1 or 2 runs that you give up, quality starts every time. But even those guys are going to struggle some. You don't take them out of the lineup, right? You keep running them out there, and you keep asking, okay, how do we get things right? How do we tweak a few things mechanically? How do we look at how we're preparing? And that's what they're doing right now with Saros and the coaching staff. And I have full confidence that over the long term it will happen for sure. What's also interesting too, and I don't know if we have any texters that are referring to this, but I listened to Barry Trotz with Jared the other day, and it's very noticeable what Yaroslav Askarov is doing as well.
Yeah.
He is taking even another step forward. He is dominating at the AHL level, and you can't ignore that for sure. Now, does that mean he's ready to come up and start playing every game now? No, not at all. But it does have you in the big picture saying, wow, I've got Lankinen, who is playing really well, and I've got a rising star he's living up to the hype, right? He is progressing. And Barry Trotz was talking about that. What can I do with that? This is a good problem to have long term.
And it begs the question of, do you really want to commit $8, $9, $10 million over the next 5, 7, 9, 10 years to a UC Saros who's going to be 29 or 30 this year, when you have a goaltender like Askarov that's young and would be cheaper and playing at an incredibly high level?
Yeah, and Askarov is still so young, right? There's very few who can come in and be the man when you're 21 or 22. So I still think we're a little ways. There's another growth period that and UC Saros went through this. He was ready to play games when he was 21, 22, but he wasn't ready to be a starter. And so he was Pekka Rinne's backup for about 4 years before he surpassed Pekka Rinne as Rinne aged out. So there's another stage there. We're I think a little ways away from handing him the reins, but I do think it's a fair thing. Saros is 28. He'll be 29, I think, in April, and he's got 1 year left on his contract. And that is a constant thing. Is okay, what's the value of the next contract? What's the right number? Because I think their mindset still, and Elliott has said this every week until he doesn't say it. I'm going to go with what he's saying, that their intention is still to sign him. They can't do it until next summer. But I think that's continues to be their mindset, is that Saros is going to play for the Predators with another contract there. But, of course, we have to see how he keeps playing between now and the end of the season.
Is it summer 24 or 25?
He's got 1 more year after this on his contract at $5 million.
Got it.
Summer
So you've got
25.
time.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you can extend 1 year, but you can extend a guy 1 year before his contract ends. So I think in July, they will be eligible to sign him to an extension. But next year he will play at $5 million a year.
I'm going to venture out on a limb and say that we are not going to get Elliott, but we'll circle back with Elliott either later on in the show or later on this week. We'll continue conversation coming up next. And of course, get into your phones as well. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase were brought to you by Zen Sports. Start earning cash rewards on your bets today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and in Tennessee to bet.
Okay, time to tell you once again about Loan Pronto. I'm out here at LA, and you just heard Pete with all the particulars about what's going to happen tonight with the radio broadcast. I'll give you the particulars about Loan Pronto, and they keep hammering this home. Take advantage of the fact that rates have come down. If you got stuck with a bad mortgage over the last couple of years, you bought a home and you had to just go with what happened. You can't control these kind of things. Now they have fixed rates with APR 5. So if your rate right now is 7 or 8%, you need to get on the horn right now and refinance through Loan Pronto. And you can do this quick, fast. A lot of times, no appraisal. Most of the time, no appraisal. No costs as well for closing. Lower that payment month after month after month, and you will thank us for that. And tell them you heard it here on 102.5 The Game, by the way. Loan Pronto is great. I've worked with them before. So they will get the job done for you. Don't wait for the rates to go back up. Seize the moment. Call Loan Pronto right now and refi if you've got a mortgage rate that's in that 7 to 8 range. 615-499-5780. 615-499-5780 is the phone number, or just go to loanpronto.com. Equal housing lender, NMLS 166-1781, subject to lender approval.
Caroline, Willy, D-Mase. Stay tuned into 94.9 The Fan this Saturday for Vanderbilt men's basketball. Commodores take on Mississippi State on the road. Tip-off is at 2:30 p.m. with pregame beginning at 2 p.m. Coverage is also available on the 94.9 The Fan app. Willy, what's going on with your Doors, by the way?
Oh my goodness.
Not good. Not good. I'm excited about the women's team.
You should be.
I do think they're really doing well. That's exciting. What Shea Ralph is doing. I've always he's an excellent coach. She's had some bad luck with injuries and things like that, but now it looks like she's finally got a winner there. And in the meantime, I mean, you guys know I was really excited last year what Jerry Stackhouse was doing. They made a great run, but man, they look like a team that's very disconnected right now. I hate to say it. They're a little low on talent, but they're even lower to me in connectivity. I just don't see the same group that's playing for one another right now, and it's got to be frustrating the heck out of Jerry Stackhouse. Like I watched them at Memphis play tough, go right to the wire at Memphis and have a chance to win in the final minutes. Then they battled Alabama. I even thought the game at Ole Miss last Saturday, they hung around. They were battling. But last night worries me a little bit because I just saw a team that in the second half, to me, they were out. Let me get my shots up. I'm putting my head down. I'm going one-on-one. And let me see if I can just get 14, 16 points by the end of this night. I just don't see a team that's cohesive. And I worry what that's going to look like over the next few weeks. And to me, it starts with your leaders. I think Ezra Manjon plays really hard. I love the way he plays. I love watching him play. I've been disappointed, I have to say it, with Tyron Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
He has not come back a better player than the way he was playing last year. And there's a lot on his shoulders. He came back, but I don't see him leading the guys into the fight. I don't see him making his teammates better. I see a guy that is just kind of floating out there. And I hate to say it, but that to me is a big issue. But in the grander scheme of things, I also see a team that has just been behind in the game that you have to play now, and that is the transfer game and the NIL game. You know, they had guys transfers out, they had guys transfer in, but they've come out on the short end of that, right? Transfers they have brought in look to me like more mid-major players. They play hard, they're trying, but they're just not. They're getting overmatched by the top guys in the SEC. And Auburn is an ultra talented team.
Might be the best team in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, my goodness, are they talented? I mean, that guy has gone from Texas. I don't know what he did over there. That was bad news. And Ole Miss kind of looked a little sleazy by hiring him. But the guy can coach and the guy can get some players. They have some players at Ole Miss. But so Vanderbilt looks under. They're not as athletic. They're not as talented as all of the top teams in this league. So you put that all together and you got big trouble over there. And the fan base is very, very frustrated. So I'm bummed out for Jerry Stackhouse. I don't know that he has the NIL resources right now. I think Vanderbilt, I saw earlier this week, they have made another connection with an organization, a partnership that is supposedly going to help them with NIL, but they have to catch up. Right. That's the reality. I hate it. I don't like college basketball right now to a large degree. I mean, I love college basketball. I always love it, but I don't like it right now because of this. It's goofy. It's not connected. It's all about almost like a semi-pro league right now. Who can buy the players? And it stinks. And I don't think that's what Jerry Stackhouse wants to do, but it's what kind of you have to do to survive.
It's always been about buying players. It's just everybody does it now.
Exactly. But let me ask you a question, Willie. Should that, in this situation, as it is in Vanderbilt football, should that be held against a head coach? Because we know nowadays these kids are transferring at the drop of a dime. If they're not getting play time, or they feel they can get NIL money from somewhere else, these young men are going and these women are going to other universities because they feel they can get it somewhere else. But should that be held against the head coach when you're not giving him the resources to retain these athletes?
I think that's the question, right? And that's what Candace
Mhm.
Story Lee is going to have to probably weigh as she evaluates it, because it becomes a vicious cycle. Like I like some of the freshmen that Jerry Stackhouse recruited. Isaiah West, right down the street from Good Pasture. I think he's potentially a really good player, but he's a freshman, right? He's playing against older guys. He's got good nights, bad nights. He's been banged up a little bit. They got a kid from New York, Rivera Torres. Guy can get his shot. He looks good, but he's a freshman. He can't carry them. But those are good recruits, just for example, right? But what happens now? I don't know what those two in particular are going to do, but they've got a number of freshmen. What happens every place? It's like, well, I'm not getting mine. I'm not playing enough. Our team's not really good, so I'm going to go somewhere else. So Jerry Stackhouse can't work to his strength, which I think is he makes guys better over the course of time. He gets guys. I think he did really good stuff with Ezra Mignon, with Tyron Lawrence. He can do that over the long haul, but that's not really where the college game is now. It's like you got to do it right now. You got to win right now. And the transfer game and the NIL game, I think that's a great question, D-Mase. I can see Jerry Stackhouse going, well, if X school has got X amount of dollars and we have X minus whatever that number is, then that puts me really in a tough position. And unfortunately, I think that's where they are right now. So it's a great question you're asking, Derek. And I think it's probably the central question is, are they going to help whoever is the head coach have the resources to be able to play that game? And I think Clark Lee is absolutely dealing with that same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, you've got to win, and you've got to have enough traction to where people want to come in and play for your program. People aren't looking to stay away from your program.
And that's the tough thing is, there are schools in the SEC like Texas A&M or Georgia that just has so much money and so a massive NIL fund and collective to work with. The Vanderbilt just is at an inherent disadvantage because it doesn't have that. But as it pertains to Jerry Stackhouse, well, you got to work with what you got. And if you look disconnected, if you look like 5 individuals and not one cohesive unit, well, that ultimately falls on the coach. I can't put that on NIL.
I'll give you an NIL question that I have, okay? Mm-hmm. And I don't know Tyron Lawrence at all. I have enjoyed watching him play. As I understand it, if you remember what happened, he hit the portal. I'm going to look at the draft. He waited a good long time. He sort of held out to see what was out there. And that tells me, and I've had people confirm this, that he was looking for good NIL money. Uh-huh. And I believe that Vanderbilt came through and they gave him the NIL money. They scraped together the resources to say, Tyron, we want you to come back. You're important. You're a key player for us. And he earned that. But I don't see a guy that's taking that money and saying, okay, now I'm the man. I got to lead this team. I see him, and I think this probably happens with a lot of young men, right? You get the money, and maybe you're not quite as motivated. You're not as hungry. You're not playing as well. I don't know. That's just my theory. He doesn't look like a guy to me that is as engaged and hungry and eager to get better as he was. And if his goal is to play professional basketball, maybe he will. But if I'm a pro scout, I'm not liking how his body language is right now. I'm not liking how he's playing right now. It looks like he's forcing a lot of stuff. And so I wonder how NIL affects a kid like that. I don't know. Different people probably get affected different ways, right? But I do think that's kind of an art form, right? That a coach has to kind of deal with. The players got to deal with it. The school does. Like, how do we not let complacency get in there And like, how do you think that affects his teammates? If he's getting a lot more NIL money than so-and-so and so-and-so, there's probably a little bit of anger and frustration that goes with that in the locker room.
I don't think that you can eliminate it entirely because it's a totally personal thing. Like there might be a guy that you think, a player, guy, girl, athlete in general that you think is great, that you think is motivated and focused and personifies everything that you want in your program. Money changes a lot of people, especially when you're 19 years old or 20 years old. And now you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in your pocket. More money, more problems, as they say. So I don't think that you can eradicate it as a whole, but it's all about what you build within the locker room to make sure that it doesn't become a problem and it doesn't permeate other players. And it's an art form. Well, I mean, I cannot imagine how difficult it is to manage 5 or 10, or in football cases, hundreds of guys that are now making a lot of money. It's not an easy job. That's why a college coach's job has never been harder than it is now. And it's because you're dealing with these sorts of things. It's because you're re-recruiting your own locker room. It's because you're constantly recruiting high school players and in the transfer portal. And oh yeah, by the way, you also have to be a coach. You also have to game plan. It's incredibly difficult. And I don't think that there is a one way to say, okay, this is how we can eliminate egos. You just have to hope that you have the right person in place to have the right culture in place so it doesn't become a problem.
Yeah, and remember Jerry Stackhouse on our show talking about the other part, which I think is an essential part of a coach, and that is you're trying to manage young men. You're trying to develop young men, and that gets lost in the shuffle here. That gets tough when you have to figure out how much money I'm pulling in, who's transferring in. What you're hoping to, I think a lot of coaches want this when they sign up for it, is how am I developing the person? He talked very from the heart last year about Tyron Lawrence and how he's become kind of a secondary father figure for him. I mean, Tyron Lawrence has gone through a lot of stuff. Jerry Stackhouse shared some of that with us. And so when a kid like that, who you've put so much investment in, now you get him some NIL resources for him, and it's not going as well, that's got to be incredibly frustrating for everybody involved. I'm sure Tyron is frustrated, right? He wants it to go better. But I just don't see a guy that's playing with a lot of joy and a lot of fire and the stuff that made him a really encouraging player last year when they went on that special run. They beat Kentucky. This was without Liam Robbins, remember, at the end of the season. At Kentucky in Nashville at the SEC tournament, Tyron Lawrence was huge in those games. I don't see the same player this year. And I'm trying to figure out why from afar. And I try to look at all the reasons it could be. But it's really discouraging right now for sure. And I don't mean to put it all on him. There's a lot of other things and factors that are going into them struggling the way they have.
This is a little bit of news coming out from Tom Pelissero. Mike Vrabel is in Los Angeles today. Willie, maybe you guys can meet up to interview for the open Chargers head coaching job per sources. So Mike Vrabel interviewing for the Chargers job. I think that's a good thing for the Titans because if Mike Vrabel is in fact in the coaching market, I know that that Tim Hasselbeck brought up maybe the idea of him sitting out a year or two, just kind of chilling and resting and recuperating after this past year. If Mike Vrabel is in fact in the coaching market, and in fact does get a job in this coaching cycle, that is one less team in the market that the Titans need to worry about potentially taking a candidate that they're interested in. So I think that is overall a good thing for the Titans. Mike Vrabel interviewing for the Chargers job. All right, we'll chat with. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No. I was just going to say quickly. The Chargers would be an ideal situation for him because they have the players, they have the quarterback. Now they need to have someone that can lead them, as a head coach. But he needs to hire. His hiring practices, for whatever reason, they need to change because if he can't get that quarterback right, I don't think he's going to be able to get another head coaching job. If indeed he does get that Chargers job and it doesn't go right, considering what they have, I'm not sure he'll get another one.
Yeah, and there is no Nick Saban home for wayward coaches anymore.
Nope.
All right, Ali Velvicki
on that list, by the way, it was Ken Wisenhunt was on that list. Did you guys know that? He was in Alabama this past year.
I did not know that, but Butch Jones went into that program. Lane Kiffin resurrected his career under Nick Saban. I mean, the list is long. It's very long. Ali Wilnicki of Zen Sports will join us coming up next. We've got the divisional round of the playoffs coming up this weekend. She will give us her best bets of the weekend. Ali Melnicki coming up next. Caroline Willy D-Mase, 1025, 1063 The Game. Caroline, Willy, D-Mase for broadcasting from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Game Nashville studios, keeping your home feeling comfortable all year round. We've got a full slate of divisional round games this weekend, and joining us now to give us her best bets of the weekend is Allie Melnicki, our friend over at Zen Sports. Allie, we had the Cowboys choking yet again. We had the Lions with their first playoff victory in 32 years. Hoping the drama continues this weekend. First and foremost, one game that I'm incredibly intrigued in. I think all eyes in the NFL are going to be on this one. Chiefs at the Bills. Bills narrow 2.5-point favorites. What is your take on this game? What do you like?
Well, we all remember that epic game in the playoffs a couple years ago where it was just shootout after shootout. The last 2 minutes were just electrifying. That one, I think the Bills still have clear in their heads. I really liked how Josh Allen in this offense is playing. It's just been so tough to stop them ever since they had that offensive coordinator change. I know that the Chiefs are the Chiefs, defending Super Bowl champs, but this is in Buffalo. Bills Mafia is a really tough crowd to play in front of. I know that I'm not taking anything away from Mahomes and Kelsey and team, but I think that this is the Bills game. I actually think it's their year to make it to the Super Bowl from the AFC, so I'm siding with the Bills.
Bills Mafia in full force this past weekend, sitting on massive piles of snow, freezing cold temperatures. And I might be with you on this one. As much as I am very reluctant to trust Josh Allen, I like what I saw from him this past weekend against the Steelers. And you mentioned Josh Allen. CJ Stroud is another one that I step away from Wild Card Weekend being so impressed about. But now they're on the road in Baltimore, the number 1 seed in the AFC. Do you think the Texans and CJ Stroud could pull this one out?
I definitely love them to cover the spread, and I would not be surprised if they pull off the upset. I was high on the Texans from the beginning of the year. I predicted they would make the playoffs. I know I picked against them last week. I regretted it. I really love how this kid is playing. I love how their offense is meshing, and they keep getting injuries and keep winning. Listen, we know what the Ravens have done in the past, but with Lamar Jackson, he hasn't had the most success in the playoffs, so you know there is still going to be pressure on him to perform. And sometimes we've seen that number 1 seed that has that bye week. Sometimes that does that more harm than good. So I think it's tough to go against the Texans' momentum right now. Definitely take the points, but I would not be surprised if they pull off the upset.
We'll talk with Allie Melnicki of Zen Sports. Another game I'm intrigued by. The Packers have been one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest teams, the last half of the season. They put it on the Dallas Cowboys. I think many people probably thought, hey, we saw that one coming. But now they got to travel to the Bay Area to face the 49ers. Would you take the Packers in the points? I think they're 9.5, 10-point underdogs.
I'm actually going to go with the favorite, the Niners. I think that they're the best team in the league. I think that loss to the Ravens a couple weeks ago where they got blown out was an anomaly. Listen, we know how Green Bay has struggled in the past going into San Francisco in the playoffs. I know they're a hot team right now, but the Dallas the Dallas defense compared to the San Francisco defense is a completely different ball game. I think Jordan Love gets pressured. His rookie core is way too young to be dealing with that secondary of the 49ers. So I know it's a high spread. I know the public is pounding the Packers because of what they saw last week, but I'm not getting fooled. I think San Francisco wins this one comfortably.
All right, Allie, let's round it out with the last one. The Lions have got a lot of people on the bandwagon. I happened to be in Vegas when that game was going on with the Rams. I was stunned. I shouldn't be stunned, but there were so many Lions fans walking around in their Lions jerseys in a random place like Vegas. People love this team, but now they've got a great opportunity against the Bucs. What do you think their chances are?
I love this. I love this Lions squad. I loved them last year when they just missed the playoffs, and they're my brother's team, so I'm rooting for them to get there. I just think that they have all the momentum as well right now. That crowd was ferocious last week. One of my coworkers was actually at the game and said it was just electrifying in there. I think the Bucs are a great story. I think they had a great end to the year, but they did beat a Philadelphia Eagles team that we saw was collapsing for weeks. The Lions are a totally different story. They got their first playoff win in decades. I think this is the Lions' game to win, and the Bucs season, sadly, will come to a close.
I think the people want a Texans-Lions Super Bowl. Everyone is just rooting for the chaos. Allie, appreciate you as always, and appreciate your best bets of the weekend. Enjoy the games, and have a good one.
Thanks, you two guys.
All right, appreciate it. Ali Melnicki, our friend over at Zen Sports. We always appreciate our people over at Zen Sports. And that is going to do it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Preds in action tonight at 9 p.m. Stillman and Company is up next.
Be love and love on your people. Have a great day and peace.